Welcome to the Explainer. Let's just dive right into a pretty fascinating paradox today. Imagine a situation where an entire community goes along with a massive lie just to save face. And by doing so, they effectively make the only honest person in the room look absolutely insane. There's a saying that perfectly captures this dynamic. The whole town made me look like a fool, but the fool was the only one who didn't lie. Today we're exploring the incredible social science behind this phenomenon, and we're going to look at history's ultimate truth tellers. Now, be honest for a second. Have you ever agreed with a lie just to avoid standing out? We've all been there, right? Because today, we are unraveling the deeply rooted psychology of why groups maintain falsehoods, and we're uncovering the one historical figure brave enough to actually break that illusion. It turns out, human beings are literally wired to conform, sometimes to our own detriment. All right, Section 1, the town of lies, and why communities collectively deceive. So, the crucial piece of the puzzle here is a sociological concept known as pluralistic ignorance. It's essentially a collective illusion, and it perfectly explains why an entire community might go along with a view they actually reject in private. Imagine everyone in a room thinks a new policy is terrible, but because everyone else is just nodding along, nobody speaks up. Everyone falsely assumes they're the only one who disagrees. This creates a massive divide between public compliance and private dissent. The town publicly complies out of fear of embarrassment or backlash. They nod, they smile, they go along with the crowd. But privately, almost everyone dissents. It's a literal inconsistency between our attitudes and our behavior, a concept researchers actually started discussing way back in the 1920s. You know, research on rural communities highlights this exact pressure perfectly. Studies show that the suffocating fear of gossip acts as a remarkably powerful form of social control. The fear of becoming the talk of the town basically forces people into submission. People want to protect their reputation so badly that they'll participate in the collective lie, even if they know for a fact it's completely fabricated. Moving on to Section 2, the spiral of silence, the high cost of speaking out. So, according to the spiral of silence theory, which was introduced by Elizabeth Noel Neumann back in 1974, after observing political elections, humans have an inherent, almost biological fear of isolation. We're social creatures. So, if an individual looks around and perceives that their opinion is in the minority, they're just going to stay silent to avoid being ostracized. That deep fear of social isolation is the engine that drives this entire spiral. Here's how the spiral actually works, step by step. First, it starts with that raw fear of isolation. Then people assess what they think the majority believes. Because of that fear, the perceived minority voluntarily silences itself. And here's the kicker. Because the minority is silent, the perceived majority seems so much larger and grows louder, which further suppresses the truth and turns a total lie into a social norm. Which brings us to a really fascinating crossroads in today's Explainer. If the fear of social isolation is so incredibly strong that it traps an entire town in a lie, who actually has the psychological makeup to stand up to that crushing pressure of conformity? Like, who is immune to this fear? Let's get into Section 3. Enter the wise fool, the historical antidote to the spiral. Tracing this archetype across history, we can see how society has consistently relied on the outsider to pierce through collective delusions. We see it everywhere, from Socratic irony in ancient Greece, where Socrates feigned ignorance to expose the foolishness of the elites, to the holy fools of the Middle Ages, to the sharp-tongued court jesters of the Renaissance, all the way up to the modern trope of the idiot savant. Society has always needed a mirror. So what makes a wise fool? Well, the wise fool operates completely outside social control. Because they're already on the fringes of society, they are entirely immune to the spiral of silence. I mean, they don't fear isolation because they're already isolated. And this uniquely positions them to mock the social elite, usually using humor and riddles without facing the typical sanctions that would completely destroy a normal citizen. Now, we actually have to distinguish between two historical concepts here, the natural fool and the artificial fool. In Renaissance courts, the artificial fool was actually a highly intelligent figure. The word artificial back then literally meant well-crafted or intelligent. These jesters deliberately used eccentricity to indirectly advise kings. They put on a mask of foolishness to deliver hard truths, simply because, historically, telling a king he was wrong without wearing bells on your hat was a really great way to lose your head. All right, Section 4, the wisdom in folly. Truth tellers throughout literature and history. Consider this incredible quote from Shakespeare's King Lear. In the play, Lear is surrounded by absolute sycophants who just feed his delusions. The fool, however, is the sole voice of reason. Using a mix of raw candor and genuine affection, the fool tells the self-deceived king the unsayable truths that his flatterers absolutely refuse to mention. The whole court plays along with Lear's lies, but the fool alone speaks reality. Across different eras, we see varying methods of the fool. Whether it's Socrates claiming, "I know that I know nothing," the court jester wrapping a biting political critique in a witty riddle, or a holy fool unsettling the rigid power structures of their day, they all share one vital, unifying function. They expose the glaring contradictions and pluralistic ignorance of their time. The 16th century scholar Erasmus beautifully captured this paradox in his famous mock encomium, The Praise of Folly. He argued that conventional wisdom often leads straight to misery, while embracing one's foolish inclinations can actually lead to true joy. It was a masterful critique showing how the rigid intellectual dogmas of the elite were, in reality, far more foolish than the simple, authentic lives of everyday people. And finally, Section 5, Daring to be Foolish, and Why Society Needs Its Fools Today. Okay, this is the big takeaway here. The wise fool is the ultimate circuit breaker for the spiral of silence. Because the fool doesn't fear social isolation, they alone possess the power to shatter the pluralistic ignorance that holds the town of lies hostage. When the fool finally speaks up, they signal to private dissenters that they aren't alone, causing the entire collective illusion to completely collapse. This is exactly why one loud, honest voice can change a whole room. Adopting the virtues of the fool in your own life doesn't mean acting silly or completely unhinged. It means prioritizing the truth over your reputation. It's about having humility, a radical openness to seeing things exactly as they actually are, and daring to act with absolute authenticity, completely free from intellectual pretensions or that desperate, exhausting need to fit in. I'll leave you with this final thought to wrap up today's explainer. In a world terrified of isolation, stepping out of the spiral of silence takes an immense, almost incomprehensible amount of courage. The whole town might try to make you look like a fool, but as history and sociology show us over and over again, the fool is often the only one who doesn't lie. So the question is, are you brave enough to be the fool? Thanks so much for tuning in, and keep questioning the consensus.